What does it feel like to miss your penis?
I 100% feel like I was part of some cruel medical and social experiment. I wish somebody hugged me a few years back and be like, you know what, you can present feminine, you can wear heels, hair, whatever you want, but the sad reality, we don't have technology to make you an actual woman.
I think this is really interesting because, like, if you transition and you are a trans woman and you remove your penis, or if you get orchiectomy, your body's ability to produce testosterone is gone. And so if you want to detransition, you either have to take testosterone shots and go through the process again, or you have to take estrogen because your bones will develop osteoporosis. They'll literally become weaker, and you basically can't exist without sex hormones. So the important part about removing the penis is that you are removing the testes. So you're no longer producing testosterone.
Part of your kind of transition horror story here is that you have a neovagina that isn't working properly, you have osteoporosis.
And
scoliosis.
I think that was one reason.
So
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
I mean, it's transphobic to say, but after I've been through the system, I 100% feel like I was part of some cruel medical and social experiment, except for nobody checked on me. And if I offed myself, I would not even be included in any statistics. I'm sure they would just write me off as some other issues. None of the people who gave me letters, surgeries. Moreover, I've spent thousands of dollars. I've traveled across the country, did all the consults trying to get help. So every time I went to consults, I entered my history, my information. None of those people are studying like detransitioners. So when trans community says regret rate is 1% and complication rate is 1%, that's bullshit.
It is bullshit.
But what they don't really tell you is that the body treats you as a wound.
It tries to close up.
Yes, constantly trying to close up. In my case, it started shutting down right away pretty much. So I got a revision. Like a few months later, I was back on operating table, and I got blamed at the time that like you didn't dilate enough, even though I was religiously dilating, and I couldn't understand it, just patient blamed pretty much. Now that I talk to other people, it's the same happens.
This is so scary too, because the trans community is so medicalized, and everyone in the trans community is constantly looking at surgeries as the solution to the problem. And so I think for a lot of people, feeling better is just like another surgery away. And it's constantly pushing people to go further into it. And I think it's really unique from other medical interventions. Like if you're depressed and they put you on SSRIs for 6 months or for a year or for 2 years, and it's not working for you, and you're still depressed and you're getting all of these side effects. Well, what do? They probably take you off the SSRI, or they put you on another medication maybe. They put you in cognitive behavioral therapy. There are all sorts of options. What they don't typically do is just say, well, you need to go much further on this SSRI, like, right? They don't just say like, all right, well, we'll just double your dose and double it again and double it again. But that's basically what you do with transition, where if you are transitioning and you're depressed, well, what's the solution? Oh, well, go further, get surgery now, make it even harder to go back. And so I think it's very dangerous, because there are some people for whom transition will not work out, and those people will inevitably be encouraged to just transition harder.
So they kept on blaming me for not dilating enough, and so they did the surgery, which they just opened me back up and was like, you have 8 inches, congrats. And I was like excited. So I drove back to Massachusetts, and by the time I got home, pretty much I already lost 1 inch. I couldn't dilate back up. I was like,
oh my gosh,
okay, I'm gonna save the 7 inches, that's plenty, you know. And I was like putting stents in me, driving a car with a dildo inside of me and with tight pennies, like to the point that I couldn't even pee. Honestly, my story is not as bad, because there's other detrans males, I don't know will I have time, but like they have it worse. It's people who have no sensation in their like groin.
I saw a viral post from another detransitioner who said that you could literally stab his genitals with a knife and there is no sensation.
Yeah, Richie.
And
this is so horrifying. And this is why people always, like that Britney lady from Politically Provoked, she's like, why don't you just go for the surgery? This is why. The surgery is so brutal on your body. And even if it generally works out for people, the cases where it doesn't work out are horrific. And I just like can't stomach it. Even though I do have like, I don't know, bottom dysphoria. I have like very intense dysphoria about a lot of things. One of those things is bottom dysphoria. But I would be too scared of something like this.
So this is like really intense for me to hear all this, obviously. And it's so interesting because obviously we're coming from different sides of the coin to where like transition was a correct decision for me, and trying to place myself in the shoes of someone who it's not is very emotional. Like, I'm so sorry this has happened to you. I don't know what else to say. I mean, you've had the surgery. What does it feel like to miss your penis?
Honestly, like, I didn't miss it up until I started, like, I mean, I missed it, but I couldn't admit it to myself. It was like a sunk cost fallacy. And then I started having phantom limb thing happening. I would wake up in the morning and have dreams about having a penis. And then I would wake up and not have it. And it was just such a mirror situation because when I was convinced I was a woman, I was like remembering how I was a kid.
I want to ask Shapeshifter about this because their presentation is, I don't know that much about their identity. Blair White's using him. I think we used she when we were talking on like the panel. So I don't know if they like go between them or if like anything's fine. I don't know what their position is specifically. But like their presentation is very, very feminine. So I wonder what their thinking is with that. Like, I wonder, because like with me, I would say that transition cost me a lot. But the result that it got me necessarily was an improvement. I'm just like, when I question my own transition, I always say that like, I'm not sure if all of the cost was worth it, but I am in a better place. Like, I am better off. I just don't know if it was worth doing it. So like, I don't see a reason to become not, to detransition or whatever. But with Shapeshifter, it seems like they do want to detransition. So I wonder if they have plans to go to a more masculine presentation.
But I realized I will never be able to get back my penis, and it's a very traumatic realization, and it's super sad. I mean, I don't want to like a pity party, but it is sad. Like, I mean, I fucked my life kind of. I could have been so much more vibrant person and could have accomplished so much more, And I do miss my full sex drive, and I honestly can't even take too much testosterone because it will give me more sexual desires, and I can't really experience all that because it's traumatic. And honestly, moving forward, I don't even know like what hormones I'm going to be on. And I told them that I was not happy with my transition. I was trying to get in touch with one of the therapists who gave me letters, and nobody even gave me his email. So yeah, it's like they really don't care. It's like they don't want to even know, because why? It's a big industry. All the surgeons.
And it only is a bad look for them to have a patient say, I regret this.
Right, because it doesn't align with the general narrative, because it will make a lot of people reconsider if that's the right step for them. I wish somebody hugged me a few years back and be like, you know what, you can present feminine, you can wear heels, hair, whatever you want, but the sad reality, we don't have technology to make you an actual woman.
So you wish someone would have stopped you from transitioning?
I wish. And my parents tried to, but they were not in America, and they just told me like, it was more of a religious spin, but at the time I was not willing to listen to them. They just said, in a Muslim religion it's haram, they said it's like you're going against God. But if one of medical professionals said, like, I just feel so angry. I feel like these people didn't have my best interests. They never tackled my childhood traumas. They never dove deeper. They just assumed that was like, they affirmed me, into this, I believe in, to self-harm.
No, I think it's challenging too, because even in a perfect world, there are going to be some people for whom transition simply doesn't work. And there are going to be some people for whom it does work. And distinguishing between those groups is really hard. I think it's made harder by the fact that being trans is so politicized, and whether or not you continue to transition is so politicized. Earlier, we were talking about the teacher with the massive fake breasts and the fact that only like right-wingers are covering that or talking about that. I think that that's really scary because it means that it's necessarily a political thing to talk about, and it doesn't have to be. News media in general could comment on that and denounce that. But because the left-wing media and the centrist media is not willing to do that, it becomes a win for the right. And so I think a similar thing occurs with detransitioners, where because the left wing is not willing to talk about it, it becomes a political thing by nature, in the way that non-political events simply aren't, because when you see something that's only being covered by right-wingers, you assume that its very existence is something that is contentious. And that doesn't have to be the case. So I think that really trans people and detransitioners are harmed by just how political the discussion has become and how tribal people have separated into camps regarding it.
People need to go back to a science lab and figure out and have better structured definition of what true trans is. Yes. And this is not gatekeeping. We're in trouble. Like there's already so many kids that regret it, you know?
And what's so wrong with gatekeeping?
Yes, it's like, this is the only medical situation where you get to choose your own treatment plan. Like, what the hell? You get to choose, like...
This is the other thing. I'm very much in favor of gatekeeping. Not just like... I mean, gatekeeping is just essential. I don't know like how much I want to talk about this because the way that I mean that is a little bit different, I think, than what they're talking about. But yeah, in order for anything to work, you have to make sure that it's being done to the right people. That's true with medical treatments, but also like with the ability to exercise civil rights with the Canadian teacher that we just talked about. That only applies to people who are acting in good faith, that aren't manipulating the law in order to take advantage of other people. And so you have to make sure that there is a boundary for who is able to, and in what circumstances people are able to wield the language of civil rights in order to defend their actions. And the fact that people can wield the language of civil rights to defend their fetishism is really dangerous. And I think it's an indication of the inability of the left to distinguish between people who fit into the group and people who don't. If you are the person who's using fetish in this way, you don't fit into the group. You are not the person who the civil rights laws are for.
Honestly, I enjoy presenting feminine. Like, it doesn't bother me. I enjoy it. Like,
okay. So someone should have explained to you that yes, it's okay for you to do that without getting anything irreversible done to you.
Yeah, this is another really big thing. You can be feminine, or you can be masculine, or you can be gender nonconforming, or whatever, and you don't have to be trans. And this is a really frustrating thing with non-binary people, or with like the non-binary debate, is that people act like you need to have the label of trans. You know, are non-binary people trans? It's a huge debate, but it shouldn't matter. Whether or not someone's trans or not doesn't affect whether or not they have the ability to present however they want. I think that that's freedom of speech. One of the amazing qualities of this country is, and by this country I mean America, and in general, like the West, Western individualism, is the ability to express yourself. And you don't need a medical label to do that. And so I think that a lot of people have seen trans as like a legitimizer for whatever their behaviors are, rather than just fighting for the right to do it in of itself. So I think that's a real tragedy. And I think that we've seen just this total medicalization of all of these things. What's the harm if someone calls themselves trans? I think that by categorizing non-binary people who don't need medical transition and people who desperately need medical transition within the same group is a real mistake, because both of these types of people really need different things in life, right? They need different protections. They need to be treated differently because one group just doesn't need the medical treatment. And so when you categorize them together, I think you implicitly tell people who are just gender non-conforming, like shapeshifter, that they need to go down this medical road. And it's really not necessary. And so I think it's another reason to disambiguate between people who have a medical need for transition and people who don't. People who do need the transition should be in a different category and in a different group, and their struggles should not be used as justification for gender non-conforming behavior, because frankly, you don't need to justify the gender non-conforming behavior. And by justifying it with this medical association, you encourage people who wouldn't otherwise need to medically transition to transition.
I feel a little angry. I just feel like they affirmed my delusions. And honestly, I feel a little angry towards them. I know it's not their fault. Like, I own the fact that I signed on a dotted line, but I was just a traumatized kid. Like, my sister, she grew up with me. She knew the conditions we grew up in. She knew that, like, I was traumatized. But again, she was like, she's even younger than me. There's no way she could have known. But they kind of, like, didn't protect me from myself.
Yeah, did you? So
honestly, this is even more isolating. So now, like, some of my trans identified friends, like, that also had complications, because when I posted that video years ago, I had a lot of people reach out to me, and they're still, I was like them, and I was convinced that I was just a trans woman with complications. But now that I realize I'm not a woman, I was always just a man who got suckered into this. It's almost like I lost a little community that I had, you know, because now I kind of like joined the other side because I was like not being heard. But
I think that's brutal. Yeah, I don't know. I think that there's a huge social pressure to not detransition. maybe even more to than not to transition, just because you sort of get it from both sides. Like, most people don't support detransitioners. Most right-wing people don't support detransitioners. Right-wing people are happy to use detransitioners as a pawn a lot of the times, but it's rare to see people really giving like empathy to them. And inversely, of course, you don't get the benefit from progressive people, and so you're really in a tough spot.
There's changing things in Florida. Like there is certain detransitioners that are going and trying to testify. Like there's a trans man, Abel Garcia. He's flying to Florida like to speak on the behalf of the trans man to show that the surgeries are not safe. But like it's being done at state levels one by one, and we may lose entire generation of kids and youth that don't need any of the surgeries. We're just making these greedy surgeons rich. After being through systems, the surgeons don't care about us. They really don't. For them, we're just a meal ticket. That's the reality. And honestly, I'm just speaking out because I will never be able probably to get any kind of functional genitals, whether it's a tunnel or any further revisions probably going to actually give me a colostomy bag. Maybe I won't be able to pee. Who knows? I'm scared at this point. So that's my reality. And sometimes I wake up, I feel like it's a nightmare that I'm going to wake up from, that it's some kind of bad acid trip. And it's not, it's my reality. I could have been enjoying having sex with tranny chasers, whatever, fucking my fiance. But now I'm just like stuck.
So what do you think could have been done differently for you, like specifically, like what are the things that doctors need to start doing that they're not doing, or switch up?
Do more research, first of all, like actual science, not people like online taking surveys. Like study the transitioners, like I don't know, do Excel spreadsheet, interview happy transitioners such as yourself and Buck Angel. I think one thing that will pop first, I feel like the bottom surgery is a big one.
Yeah.
I feel like that could make or break a happy transitioner.
Ooh, a kind of boy. Isn't it a matter of how you detransition? Like, I don't think most libs would have no empathy for detransitioners, but are coming on and framing gender resentment surgeons as money-grabbing people who don't care about quality of care isn't very fair. I think that's true, but I think that the reason why she's framing it this way, and the reason why we're watching her talk about it now, is because she's framing it this way. And if detransitioners frame it any other way, they don't really get empathy, I think, from anyone. Versus this is a way to at least get empathy from the right wing. Whereas I think that left wingers, maybe, personally, like if you speak to them and if you're friends with them, they'll probably be very empathetic. But as far as actually like having your story heard publicly and having people empathize with you on that kind of political level, I think is really hard to do unless you're willing to play into a certain narrative. And detransitioners just don't play into any left-wing narrative. If trans here means people who need something in order to eliminate suffering and happiness, wouldn't we be better abandoning trans as a world and move closer towards identifying people around what is genuinely a barrier condition for their happiness? I mean, that's like a question that gets into like what exactly we know about trans people or like people who have dysphoria. But I think that like if dysphoria functions in the way that we are typically sold to, as the way that we're typically sold, which is to say that transition is a necessary condition for happiness for some group of the population. For those people, there is this kind of hypothetical imperative to transition. If they want to achieve this kind of personal fulfillment and happiness, then they must transition.
Of course.
Hormones definitely need to be studied, like male-bodied, female-bodied.
This is the other thing. There are like no RCTs on this.
I feel like
it's all
more people should come forward and be honest about the results, because a lot of people are playing it up. There were people, playing it up online when I was getting surgery saying I'm having.
But the goal shouldn't be to seek out empathy. Empathy in this regard isn't real from the right wing. They're being used as narrative props. Shouldn't the goal just be to obtain the best care? If you move on with the idea that not only do I need to detransition, but I also need to tell people about how gender-affirming care is dangerous and a conspiracy, the empathy from the left dissolves. Yeah, I think that's true, but I think that like the left won't have empathy for it either way is the problem, right? So this is like one way to get empathy and to feel heard by people. And I think that's a problem, because I think the left is not willing to give empathy where they really should, which is to say the left should give empathy in the sense that they just want the best kind of care for people, right? And so if the left-wing goal was to just like get the best kind of care, they would talk about these detransitioners and they would invite more people on to talk about it and to have these important discussions about what is the best way to treat trans people and what needs to be done regarding research and etc. And because they're not willing to do that, we only see people who are willing to play to a right-wing narrative.
Multiple orgasms. Testosterone.
Oh, but also, just very quickly, empathy is essential. And the reason why empathy is essential, especially in our political framework, is that democracy and getting other people to work with you and to see your position and to, work with politicians is how you actually affect change. So in order to get things done, you do need to encourage empathy in people. But if feeling heard is I'm spreading anti-trans healthcare propaganda, why should people feel empathy for that? I've not heard many left-wing commentators or regular libs, TWLL, I think, to detransitioners to, tell detransitioners to fuck themselves or anything like that. I think it's just like, I really think it's just like silence on the issue is the problem. I think that left-wingers refuse to engage with the issue as a whole. They refuse to see every side of it, even sides that are not favorable to their cause. So you'll hear left-wingers say things like, if trans women don't get transition stuff, if we don't get HRT, they'll kill themselves. We don't really have evidence for that. We have surveys where you ask these people, like, do you think this increases or decreases your suicidality? We don't have RCTs. We don't have studies with particularly large sample sizes. And so you end up having this thing that we maybe have like some weak evidence for being totally blown up as like a rallying cry of like, we need HRT, otherwise we'll kill ourselves, even though we don't have that great of evidence for it. And so whenever there's something that might contradict that narrative, it totally just gets shut down and shut out. And I think that's really dangerous to truth. Say I take a vaccine and have an adverse reaction due to an unknown allergy. Personally, I will have empathy for that person, but if that person goes on OAN to tell people, guys, vaccines are dangerous, well, okay, you say that's irresponsible, but I think there's a fundamental difference between these things. And that's that vaccines have an enormous amount of very robust literature showing their effectiveness. We don't have that same amount of literature showing the effectiveness of transition surgeries or hormones. And so lacking that evidence, I think it's important to have these kinds of conversations.
They may serve some glands, but it will never be a cis vagina. Like, stop pretending. Sometimes a bitter truth is better than a sweet lie. As I said, I wish somebody just hugged me and said, like, you're not a woman. Like, never going to be one, no matter what you do. And I mean, that would have maybe broke me at the time. And some people told me, I did talk to one tranny chaser at the time, and he was like, my wife had the surgery and now she's post up with regrets, don't do it. But when I reached out to trans communities, they were like, oh, just tranny chasers, they want you to keep your dick because it's their toy or whatever. It's like, they were telling me the truth, and it's like, I wasn't willing to hear it because I was so brainwashed. I was literally convinced like I was an actual woman.
So what do you want your story, what's the ripple effect you're hoping from telling your story for kids and people in general? What effect does speaking out, what do you want it to have?
Original blueprint is important. It's not worth losing, at least from male side, it's not worth losing your male sex drive, your energy, over to just have a couple of inches on your hips or have maybe bigger breast tissue. I want to say men and women come in different shapes and sizes. I want to say future run feminine men are not brutalized by patriarchy or just everyone. I don't know why tomboys are considered cute often, but like, as a femboys or whatever the soft boys, whatever the correct term is without offending anyone. It's like, I don't know why we're like the bottom of the barrel, and that sucks. And I don't feel like the future generation needs to become women just to feel accepted and feeling on demand. It's like trans became this hot label. It's like being trans is hot. Like, people will cast you into movies and you'll do well in porn and you'll have all this.
I do wonder if a part of transition, because, for all of human history, you had gender non-conforming people, but you've never had a group quite like modern trans people. And part of that is just technology. Like, the ability to transition medically is something that hasn't really existed until very recently. But you see this massive explosion of all of these people who are really identifying with this label, and it's totally unique to anything that we've ever seen. And I wonder if part of that is just like the novelty. Like, when people first find out that they can medically like switch things up, there's going to be a lot of people who try that. And I wonder if in the future we'll move past it. We'll see it as like a cultural phase that we went through where lots of people tried this and we kind of found the boundaries really quickly. And I think that would be like a very good, hopeful solution, is maybe in the future we realize like, yeah, this works for some people, but we need to be cautious with it because there's a lot of people who it doesn't work for.
Opportunities, but feminine boys don't get the same opportunities. And honestly, I don't know what to fix it. Thank God for, I mean, I don't want to like, obviously some of those influencers are problematic too. They have problematic moments. I don't want to put anybody on pedestal, but at least there's like James Charles and like Jeffree Star. So at least examples. Like they may never be perfect. I'm not perfect either, but like at least we have some examples. So that's good. I mean, I wish I had discovered them sooner. Maybe I would have not rushed into things, you know, but again, I feel like we really have a problem and it's going to be a huge medical disaster. This is like a sexual lobotomy. This is like lobotomies of 21st century. And like you guys heard it here. So,
oh my God, that's
I've thought about that comparison, like to lobotomies, this kind of medical trend that was seen as like a panacea. I mean, you have all of these young women, especially young women, young girls, teenage girls, who have a lot of anxiety about their bodies. They have a lot of depression. And frankly, that's normal for being a teenager and for being a teenage girl. And these people are kind of shoved into transition. They're told to transition. They're told that this is an effective solution for body image issues. And it can be, I think it can be for some people, but when it's sold as, again, like a panacea, as a cure-all, I think that that's really dangerous.
so true. And just the fact that like people like you didn't exist a few years ago. Like there was not this wave of detransitioners and now it's starting. And I feel like it's a train that is just going and going. And until people acknowledge that it's happening, it's just going to keep getting worse.
Yeah, honestly, this needs to stop till more research is done.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please follow Shapeshifter on all social media. I think your story is so important. And I hope that, you know, after this, you go on to be speaking on even bigger platforms because you need to be heard. So thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's a good amount of evidence that gender reassignment surgery works, and isn't the surgery gate kept fairly well? Like, I don't think any average 15-year-old can walk into a clinic and get a date for surgery. I don't know what you mean by average. I mean, like, there are 15-year-olds who get double mastectomies, who get their breasts removed. But yeah, those people aren't like the average 15-year-old, because the average 15-year-old isn't even like asking for that, so.